All right. In this episode, Darrell and I discuss when you should deploy your app to a production environment. So this is an environment where you're backing up data in your database. You've got everything secured and locked down, ready for your users. And if you don't know who we are, Darrell and I were co-founders of a company called Realbase, which we recently sold for 180 million. I was CTO and Darrell was head of product. Let's jump into today's episode. Righto. So when we started Clipflow, it started as one of these things that we spoke about in a previous episode about the woman in the red dress and about building as many products as you possibly can in a year, spending 1 to 2 months building a new product. And because of that mentality, it got really tiring building or signing up for new AWS accounts, setting up new emails, productionizing each environment. So I ended up just building one AWS environment that we just shoved everything into. And so every product would just live there. So it was just, you just know your one login and you can just jump in and get all your buckets and everything was there. Now, that is not a good practice and something that I wanted to bring up for most people even starting. Yes, it's a bit more work setting up a new AWS account every time you start a project, but that's one of the reasons why we say build one product at a time, focus on that, because guess what? You only have to set up one AWS account. But the reason behind it is because of something we've learned in the past is when you've built an app and you've put your S3 bucket into a place, there is no easy mechanism, or there isn't really a mechanism actually moving that into a new organization. So let's say you went and you said you sold your business or something like we've experienced in the past, and you want to move that now out of your shared account into its own account. It's an actual nightmare. So you also, when you have heaps of users, you don't want to be doing this because it can create downtime. You can stuff something up. You could have thousands of files. So at the moment, we already had about 300 files. A lot of those are video, a lot of big files. And to move them across is actually a process, right? So we had to enable AWS syncing, create up new buckets. You can't have the same bucket name, so you end up having a different bucket name. You have to reconfigure your apps. It's just a whole bunch of work.
Has to reference to that bucket, yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm convinced that that's designed purely to keep AWS implementation and consultants in business.
Look, I actually don't know. I understand the limitation. They have a unique name across all of S3, so you can reference it from no matter where. But it is it's a lot of work, right? So I decided that it was stressing me out in the back of my head. I'm like, I can't have a production app in my shared AWS account. So I made sure that on the weekend when it was, when there is downtime, and especially now that we have very few customers in the beginning days, to make that shift and do that work. And then also put it in its own hosting account. So we're using fly.io. So I also moved it across there. But the reason or the topic of today is knowing when to deploy your app to production properly, right? So this is thinking about or figuring out when is the right time, because you could just be in conceptual stages and never take off. But again, I think all these topics touch each other, because if you're thinking that way, you're probably building multiple apps.
So when you say actually deploying to production, you mean as opposed to just doing a quick push with Fly.io, moving everything into a proper architecture, proper ecosystem with CI/CD and everything.
Yeah. So there's steps to this as well. I haven't gone full ham building out a CI/CD pipeline yet. I'm still deploying straight from a machine, single dev. I think those things can scale with time. I think it is okay to push to, production in the early days when you don't have many users and you are testing there. But as you get users and you start making money from this thing and you want to take it seriously, you need to take your infra seriously, because you don't want to lose people's data. So, day one, I would always say put in a production database and then be running a backup, at least, at bare minimum, because data is something you can't get back. And if you lose someone's data, you lose their trust. So that's something I'm very highly cautious of, regardless whether it's a prototype playing around or anything. But then the next steps are obviously your CI/CD, which is, for people that don't know, continuous integration and continuous deployment. So basically you can push code up as a dev, and then when the changes are accepted into your master branch or your production branch, you then go and build it and push it straight out. So you can continuously deploy. You don't have a schedule. And I think those things are really important, especially when you have teams and you start implementing PRs, so pull requests and reviews. But it's and the question is, why not just do it from the start? And I think you should do a lot of this stuff from the start, especially like we're saying, marry your startup. Do the work in the beginning, but to a point where it's maintainable. Don't go and build a full CI/CD pipeline day one, because you are going to waste a bit of time. If you're using a tool like something like Vercel or something and it's built in, then sure, use it, be my guest. But if you are hosting in a different environment, like having staging environments, production environments, it all adds complexity, which is perfectly fine. But I think it just probably don't do it day one there. You can bring that in a bit later, but make sure you're hosting. If you are going to take an app seriously and you actually do want to get customers, make sure that the data is secure and, so that you keep that trust in the long term.
Yep. And so just for my own knowledge, the difference between what we already had and you changing the AWS was just about getting it out of your own bucket.
So it was in its own bucket. So the AWS, it's more about the account, the AWS account. So it was a personal or business account. It wasn't a personal account, it was a business account, which we basically host all of our apps inside of. But by doing that, you create this. It's hard for, like, I'm thinking long term. Like, this is a product that we're committing to, so we're thinking long term. Like, what does it look like in 3, 5, 10 years? So it's about making sure billings all, by app. So we know that this app costs X dollars, not like all of our AWS stuff costs this, which you can get breakdowns, but it's a little bit harder. And you can put things on different credit cards and stuff like that. So just separation of concerns. So we had that. Definitely already had a production database, so nothing had to change there. That was already set up properly. It was just really the assets, which was concerning for me, because we are hosting video, we're going to get to terabytes very fast. Like, each video is 2 gig to 3 gigs. So over time, it's going to get harder and harder to migrate. So when you have terabytes of data, it takes hours or days instead of what took me an hour.
Yep. And when you've got users, anyone could be trying to access that while you're migrating, and it can really jeff things up.
And another thing that was key in that process was changing the way we stored data in S3. So we had it as a standard storage, but now what I've done is I've also moved it to intelligent tiering. So basically for us, what that means is cost savings in the future. So if video and a product like Clipflow, you're going to be building or creating a project where the end goal is to release a video. Once you've reviewed that video and actually put it on YouTube and sent it live, the chances of you coming back to review that are very low. So the usage of that video or the file are going to decrease. So what we've done with intelligent tiering is it will drop that down into lower or less frequently accessed storage, which means you pay less money. So because we are storing a lot of data, we need to also think about that. So there were 2 reasons for doing that. So that was the key thing. And I just wanted to bring that point forward, because I think it's important to do this stuff properly if you are taking it seriously, if you do want customers, and especially B2B, because businesses trust you with their data. They don't want you to, again, fly by night and you're just hosting it on some instance, probably with a SQLite DB, which I spoke about on Twitter with someone the other day, and I was like, how do you back that up? Because it's on the same instance. If it gets wiped, you lose your data. And people's like, but you got to have syncing set up so it stores that. And I'm like, but who's doing that properly? Like, has everyone thought about that properly? And is it actually being done in the indie dev space?
Yeah, there's too much trust there. Too much trust.
So, especially me, like the amount of data we've already got in Clipflow ourselves, it's like days and days of effort. And there'd be nothing worse than waking up the next day and just going, it's all gone.
When you've got real users and they've got a deadline to push a video out for a sponsor signed deal, like it can start raising the stakes pretty quick.
Yeah. So it's just something that I wanted to highlight, because I didn't do it in the beginning, and it's because I got caught in that fallacy of ship as many products as possible in a year, see what sticks, and then stick and build one out. But I'm not convinced that's the way or the future. So it stung me in the end, but just luckily not too late in the piece.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have slowed you down to start. It would have only made you faster. So there is that benefit. It's just, I guess, if you never think to come back and fix those things, they can become really big problems really fast if you don't keep an eye on them, which isn't so hard with a solo dev. But if you had a team, like if you were spooling up with VC money, you'd have 5 people working on things. Everyone would be doing all sorts of things, and then you'd be petabytes and petabytes of storage down the path and realize you had to make that change.
And the only reason it came to my mind is because I've done this before. So we've had RealHub in its own, in a shared kind of environment, and we spent a lot of money on DevOps to move it out. So it's one of those things that I've learned that lesson. I don't want to learn it again. So I'm doing it from the beginning. And it's always, and a key point here is to separate your production and every other environment in AWS. So as if someone does hack something, at least you're minimizing the risk. So in the production environment, you obviously have 2FA, you have it all locked down, and staging, you'd have multiple devs. So in production, you probably have 1 or 2 people have access to that account. And then in your staging and lower environments, you could have multiple devs have access to it. They can play around, they can spool up new infra, but the stakes are lower or low. There's no real risk. So it's a good practice to follow, and something we learned from the past, and just making sure we're continuing that in the future.
Yeah, don't get caught out. I think for RealHub, moving AWS to Domain, I think that was like a 6-week, 3-month project. Like it's just concluding now, moving everything into the one AWS.
I think they just swapped organization possibly. Did they move all the actual things?
No, I think they ended up to get the economies of scale and big deals, like the big enterprise AWS account deals. To get the money, they had to move it into one thing. Huge project when you've got that much data.
So it's key, right, that it is even able to do. Imagine if that was sitting in my personal AWS account or some account on the side. So if you have it in separated concerns, very easy to swap out the billing organization, and then from there you can add things to move those things across. So keep that in mind when starting up a new environment.